So we are moving beyond thought, not back. We step beyond thought. This is humanity's destiny. And it's urgent now, not in the sense of, oh, we must get there. It's urgent in the sense that there is an intensity now to the arising consciousness, because the madness that is the dysfunction of the old consciousness is also accelerating. It gets worse, and at the same time the new is already arising. The two movements, the old still not even having reached yet the end of its madness, and the new arising at the same time. The old is still much more visible in this world, the madness of the old state of consciousness, with its need for conflict and problems, and the violence that arises out of that state, and the immeasurable suffering that humans inflict on each other and on themselves out of that state. That madness is continuing on the planet. You only need to watch the news on TV or read the paper. That's a continuation of what we have seen in the 20th century and before that. And the new is arising, not so much visible on the surface of things yet. Rarely mentioned in the media. Occasionally it is mentioned already here and there. So, this is why we are here. Simply not to make it happen, but to allow it to happen. We are simply opening the door wider so that it can, less and less, we're not offering resistance to that anymore. So, your practice here is continuous, but don't make impossible demands upon yourself. Of course you will get drawn, even here, back into mind streams, yes. You may reincarnate into a reactive mind stream. And then a moment comes when suddenly there's an awakening out of that. Oh. And you can see how clear, how obvious the difference between the states of the awakened state. A moment ago, you were in that heaviness, that dense energy. And suddenly, you step out, and it's also like having left, when you're on the plane, it goes through the clouds, and suddenly the clouds are underneath you. Oh, and there's vast, clear space, infinite. And the clouds are still there, but you're not in them anymore. Oh. And so as you walk here through the gardens along the river, see if you can be in that state where the sense perception does not absorb your attention entirely, nor the mental labels that arise to do with those sense perceptions or to do with something totally different. They don't absorb your attention totally. Attention remains free as the field of attention. In other words, you perceive in and through stillness, without needing to label everything immediately through the mind. Of course, you know you're looking at this flower, you know it's a flower without having to tell yourself that this is a flower. You know it's beautiful without having to tell yourself that it's beautiful. And so you realize that there is vast knowing beyond mental labels and concepts. And then you know far more than you could ever know through labels or concepts, because you sense there is a depth to that which we call flower and an aliveness to that which we call flower. That mystery that is not explained by the label flower at all. That mystery that is covered up by the label flower and gives you the delusion that now you know what it is. Just a sound. You've made a sound that has come out of your mouth, or you've uttered the sound in your mind, and that gives you the delusion that you know what that is. Children are told that when they learn a language, the delusion is reinforced every time you tell a child, that's called such and such. I have forgotten the names of flowers. What's that? Gladioli. This is a gladioli, if that's what it is. And the child will believe you. Dreadful. So what can you do do you tell a child, don't call it anything? That doesn't work either. But you might say to a child, well, look at it, smell it, touch it. Look. And then, as an afterthought, yeah, you can say, oh, by the way, we call it such and such, instead of saying, it is such and such. Then that creates some distance from the label, so that the child doesn't totally believe in that label, because then you get more and more trapped in concepts and labels until you reach the age of, then finally at 18, you're totally imprisoned. You've been through the system that has done it even more to you, and you're totally imprisoned in a conceptualized reality of mental labels that concern both the world around you, and they're all conditioning. All the surrounding culture has conditioned you with whatever mental labels they've put into you, and you inhabit a conceptualized reality, not knowing how dead your universe has become, how dead and deadened your reality has become. And you live equally in a conceptualized sense of self. You make yourself into mental concepts, and so this is the essence of not knowing who you are. That's the essence of this false self. Once you have a false self, nothing is seen as it is, and everything is misinterpreted through that conditioning. Everything is distorted and deadened through that conditioning. And that's how people live. And that is our entire civilization has come out of that. And is it surprising how mad the civilization is? Of course it's not surprising, considering the state of consciousness out of which it has come. So we are stepping out of that, the compulsion to label continuously, and so you move here, you walk through the gardens and along the river, and what arises is the state that is free of the need to label. And should a label arise in you as you walk, which is a thought, you recognize it as just a thought and not it. And then it arises and passes and you're back in just... And then perhaps another compulsive label comes. Okay. And then somebody comes towards you on the path, walking. And some mental judgment comes in concerning the form of this being. And you recognize it as a thought, no more. You no longer completely believe in it, you're not completely in it anymore. You allow that to be also. And then so gaps arise in which there are no labels, in which seemingly you no longer know anything. And that's why it's a little bit frightening for some people to enter that realm, because it seems at first as if you no longer knew. And how can I need to know what's going on here? I need to judge it in some way, classify it in some way. No. And you see how beautiful, powerful, intelligent and deep that state is of not labeling. And great intelligence operates here. But it is not the limited intelligence of the human mind. It's only a small aspect of the vastness of intelligence that ultimately you are. This mind-made sense of self is also much more focused on the negative than the positive. To be free, you awaken to who you are beyond your history and your life situation. You're just directing your attention to sense perceptions rather than thinking. So there's a shift from being absorbed in interpreting sense perceptions and just noticing the sense perceptions. I cannot predict what your reaction or response will be to this gathering. It could be a wonderful beginning of discovery of a deeper state of consciousness, or it could be that you are finding this gathering and this talk incredibly boring or irritating. What is he talking about? I can't stand it anymore. And then the mind goes on.
Sorry, sir.
Help is coming. Thank you. So this is all about what we might call the awakening of consciousness. So I'll be coming back to it again and again, this terminology, but just to summarize what that means for those of you who are new to it, is when you discover in yourself the ability to know what's happening in your inner space, either on the level of emotion or on the level of mind, so that you're beginning to find there is an observing presence there. The observing presence can observe whatever happens in your mind, the movement of thought, instead of being totally drawn into it, totally identified. identified with it. That is the awakening, the disidentification from thought plus emotion, the disidentification from thought. So that's what it's all about. We can approach it from many different angles and directions, but the core of this is always that. So as a little exercise in awareness or presence, let's do this. I call it do, but it's not really a doing. Becoming aware of sense perceptions, because that is part of your experience of the present moment. Sense perceptions, visual, auditory are the main sense perceptions, but the others may come in too. So there's the totality of this room. There's a man sitting on a chair. You see him on the chair, you see him on the screen, stage, people. So you take that in, the voice. You're becoming aware of that. You're giving it attention without any strain or effort. You're just directing your attention to sense perceptions rather than thinking. So there's a shift from being absorbed in interpreting sense perceptions and just noticing the sense perceptions. Huge shift. And that's already an enormously wonderful and empowering and important spiritual teaching, to become aware of sense perceptions, sensory perceptions, and remove the interpretation of the sensory perceptions. A very fundamental, deep spiritual practice. It may sound a little strange, but to be aware of something, you could either direct your sense perception towards a particular noise that you hear in the background, whatever it may be, a bird singing or the engine noise of cars or whatever, or visually a flower or a tree or the sky or the totality of whatever surrounds you, and take in the various sense perceptions and just be with it, be alert there, be an alert presence for the sense perception, like now. There's no need to interpret. So what can you add to it? You let go of the, sometimes one should say, compulsive need to immediately find some kind of interpretation for it, naming it. The continuous naming every moment has to be immediately classified and personalized and named in some way. I like it, I don't like it, or this is not quite right. And a lot of the naming is of a negative kind. You might notice when you name, there's a difficult person around, or you observe an unconscious person behaving in an unconscious way, because what else can an unconscious person do? You can't ask them to behave in a conscious way. So you're looking at an unconscious behavior and say, awful person. And then you let go of that. It's easier with trees and flowers and with people, of course. With people it's a more advanced stage, but I'm just pointing it out already, because you have ample opportunity in this world, in your life, to practice with people continuously. You may have noticed people are not easy. They're difficult. And some are quite crazy, but we'll go to that. And there are moments of craziness and relative sanity, and then they got crazy again. That's another story. You might remember your ex-husband or wife. So sense perception, bringing just awareness to sense perception, like now. You can do it in your room. You sit in your room alone and look around the room. Let go of the mind wanting to say something. You don't need it. So instead of naming, there's just an awareness behind the sense perception. That's a spiritual practice. You can do it anywhere.
I recommend that you do it whenever you're waiting for something to happen. Even a simple thing like waiting for the elevator to come, or while you're riding in the elevator, or you're waiting at the traffic light, or you're waiting for on the phone, you're waiting for your bank to speak to a human being. Half an hour, an hour. That may be too much for this spiritual practice to start with. So whenever you're waiting, and you might be surprised how many times of your day you are waiting for something. Now, most of the time, unfortunately, these days, when humans are waiting for something, even at the elevator or in a lineup in the supermarket, whatever it may be, airport, there's a lot of waiting at airports these days. So wherever they are, unfortunately, most humans immediately get hold of this device. Even I have one. Here it is. They can't wait. They cannot give themselves even half a minute without needing to fill this half a minute with something. Now, before they invented this, it was a little bit more difficult. You had to fill it with something. You had to think of something, or you became restless. Waiting, the elevator is still not coming. It's only been 20 seconds. But now, of course, you have this. You can immediately go because everybody else is doing it too, so you have to do it too. So you pull this out. There's nothing in particular happening, but everybody's doing it, so you do it too. And you're adding to the clutter of your mind, and you're adding to the unawareness of the present moment. And even worse it is when you're out, let's say you're out in nature, and then you're on a bench, you're sitting on the beach or somewhere, wherever it may be, going up. Even there, some people cannot let go of this because this is an extension of the thinking mind. The thinking mind was already a huge challenge and a problem for thousands of years. It grew and grew and grew, and then the thinking mind was so clever that it came up with an extension of itself in the form of this. And now it's even more challenging because it amplifies the thinking mind. It amplifies and adds to the clutter of your mind. Clutter meaning useless thinking, just going around in circles, ruminating, and at night even when you can't sleep. And a lot of the thinking is not pleasant for most people. You don't think for very long about a wonderful sunset that you saw last night or 2 days ago. That was such a wonderful sunset. You can't do a lot of thinking. The mind needs something else. It needs a difficult person to think about, somebody who was rude to you last week. And you cannot let go of the memory of that and what you should have said to him, but you didn't. But now you can do it in your mind. Or what may happen tomorrow or the next week. You have to think about that now, because otherwise it'll all fall apart if I don't think about this now. And so people don't realize that they live with a burden of unconscious thinking. I'm not talking about useful thinking. When there's something to apply your mind to, there's a problem that needs to be solved, and what can we do? What can I do about it? Let's look at this and that and that. The mind is a very wonderful thing when you are not the slave of your mind. So a lot of that thinking is actually destructive and unpleasant. People don't realize that the burden they carry in their minds, the burden of, for many people, an unhappy story they carry in their minds, and they think about it. And what is that unhappy narrative they carry in their mind? What do they call it? They call it my life. Oh, my life. So, why did it go wrong so many times there? And that shouldn't have happened. I had imagined it when I was 17 and 18. I imagined something real, very different, but that didn't happen. And then, of course, there are good things too. It's for many people. It's the narrative of my life is a mixed bag of good and bad. But for many others, my life is very problematic, and I cannot stop thinking about it. And the story, I have to tell myself, the story of me and my life. And anybody who wants to listen, I'll tell them the story too, of me and my life. Are you ready to listen to my life? Okay, and then I'll tell you mine, okay. That is the narrative in your mind that you confuse with who you are, which is all your memories, accumulated memories, not necessarily objectively true, some maybe, but many of the memories are colored by faulty interpretations of what people did or said or did. You can verify this if you have siblings and you're grown up, and then you talk about events that happened in your childhood when we were 6 years old. You talk to your brother or your sister. Do you remember this event when I was 6 and you were 8 or you were 7? Do you remember what happened? And then your sibling says, no, that's not what happened. So this is what happened. It's completely different. But each one thinks that's exactly how it is. And in some cases, it may well be. But whatever it is, it's a memory in your mind. You replay it, an old movie. It replays itself. And often involving people, what somebody did to you. Undoubtedly, they did do that to you. And they shouldn't have done it. This is very true. Many people have had relatively unconscious parents. They did their best, but nobody can act beyond their level of consciousness. I realized that it was a wonderful liberation when I realized, I was ready later in my life, I realized that my parents could not have acted differently because they would have been beyond their level of consciousness at that particular time. One could say that everything that you perceive is a surface phenomenon. It's the surface of reality. And underneath your perceptions, there is a vastness, like the ocean. And whatever you're seeing is the surface of the ocean. So underneath that, there's a vastness of energy formations, ultimately the one consciousness expressing itself in these all very short-lived forms. And under the deeper you go, the stiller it becomes. This is probably what Plato talked about, the ancient Greek philosopher, that there are ideas in the unseen realm. There's the world of what is translated as ideas, but it's not a good translation. He said before things exist as a physical thing and come into existence, they already exist on an unseen level in the world of consciousness, and then the consciousness manifests as something or someone. The universe manifests briefly as you. And as you become conscious, in you, it is the universe that is becoming conscious. You're not, I mean, you think you are a person, and of course, in conventional terms, you are a person. But ultimately, you're not a person, it's absurd. What does it even mean? I mean, the word means a mask. Person comes from Latin, persona means mask. I mean, you're not a mask. You're not a person. What are you? Who are you? You're not separate from the universe. So you are an expression of the universe. You haven't fallen into this universe from somewhere. You've come out of this universe. And then you go back into it, and then you come out again as something else. You die, you're born. Oh, what's this all about? And then you. Oh, that wasn't a very nice life. Oh, this one is better. But it doesn't last. So the one consciousness appearing as the multiplicity of beings. So you are the awareness of the universe. You are the consciousness of the universe. How could you not be? And you can realize that even if you are living in a prison cell, and there may be someone at some point who listens to what I'm saying right now, in a prison cell, you can realize this, and it may not be pleasant, but even if you're in a prison cell, you can at least, more fundamentally, step out or become liberated from the prison of your mind. And that is a more fundamental prison than the prison cell that you are in. Even in a prison cell, and I've had correspondence from people in prison who said they feel free now. You can become free of being prisoner of your mind, and that's a far worse prison cell than the physical prison cell. And other people perceive that they are imprisoned in a body that is no longer functioning well. As your body if your body is not functioning properly anymore, then increasingly you may feel that you are trapped in your body. And that is, for some humans, that becomes an opportunity for going deeper and realizing that, in essence, they are the consciousness that animates the body, but they are not the body. And on the level of consciousness, there's no handicap, there's no dysfunction. So we touched upon this last night, when a great opportunity arises, when the world of form and the personal sense of self that identifies with the world of form becomes very dissatisfying. That's a great opportunity. In other words, taken completely out of your comfort zone. And then you are more motivated to awaken and to realize who you are in your essence. But the good thing is, you don't have to wait for that anymore, because you have consciously chosen, well, with a little bit of help from suffering, for most of you, your personal, so-called personal suffering has been the motivating factor that brought you here. Or perhaps you've suffered in another life and have come back and have said, oh, I did enough in my last lifetime, I'm ready to awaken already now. That's fine. And then most of you have reached the point of the end of suffering. And I'm speaking of the psychological suffering that is mind produced. There is no other suffering. There is physical pain that exists, but the term suffering, in the way we use it, implies that there is a suffering entity, and it implies that there is mind, a mind-made sense of self that is not surrendered to life. And as the way I put it, humans need suffering to awaken, and suffering means they're confronted with the challenges of life. They're confronted with the problems of life. All the things that they dislike most in their lives are the most important thing in their lives. It's totally reversed. All the things that you think these things are making my life miserable, those are the very things that are most helpful for your spiritual awakening. And then that includes your ex-wife or ex-husband and people like that, because often life comes to you as people who are making your life miserable. Dogs, less so. You might get bitten by a dog, but it's unlikely that you have lived with a dog that made your life miserable, but it's very likely that you've lived with a human who made your life miserable, and probably with several. And then there are other things that were challenging: accidents, illnesses, loss of security, so-called. There's no security, it's just a loss of social function, profit job, defeats, things that you tried and you were not successful, you did not succeed. And spiritually, failure is much more helpful than success, by the way. Or you succeeded greatly, and after a while it all collapsed. Or the success remained, but it became totally empty and meaningless. You achieved fame and wealth, and suddenly you were more unhappy than before. So spiritually, the most helpful things are those things that the ego judges as the most awful things in my life.
And I trust you're not waiting for me to start the meditation. Because then you would have missed that it started already. And you would think about meditation in terms of doing something, but you don't actually do a meditation. as long as you're doing a meditation, you're not really meditating, or the meditation is not fulfilling its purpose. Meditation, true meditation, is not a technique or a mantra. It's about becoming aware of the being dimension. That's already the essence of who you are. And you don't have to do anything to become aware of the being dimension. In fact, all you have to do is to stop doing, and that's not a doing. Now, to stop doing does not necessarily mean stop external activities. But it means not to be focused exclusively on doing, so that your entire attention is continuously absorbed by the doing dimension, which of course all goes back to thinking. Thinking is doing. And then it becomes some external activity, which is fine, because that is one level of who you are. You have to do things in this world, and you have to think. And it's good. Doing and thinking is good. But if that's all there is in your life, then you're missing the deeper dimension. And then doing and thinking, this continuous absorption in that dimension of form, becomes frustrating. Leads to anxiety or depression, burnout, a sense of meaninglessness after a while. And all those who are not in touch with the deeper dimension, the dimension of being, which is the essence of who you are, which I sometimes call the essence dimension, or your essence identity, being able to sense, and this is why we are here now, being able to sense your essence identity in addition to having a form identity, which is always connected with some kind of doing or thinking, that is liberating. So what you're liberated from is an exclusive identification with who you are on the level of form. the body, the mind, and whatever the mind identifies with in the realm of form. Mental images that arise, that the mind identifies with and says, that's me, that's my body, me, my possessions, my status in society, my work, my function, my social function, my social and economic position, my class, social class or background, my knowledge that I have accumulated, or any other image, mental image, which may not necessarily be positive, it could be negative. Me, the victim, me, the one who was never given a chance. All these are mental images that you derive your sense of self from. And usually it's a certain bundle of images, and every image is also a little story. And this bundle of images becomes the self, the me, or what you refer to when you say I. And yes, that is, one could say, who you are on the level of form, but even on that level, it's certain stories that you believe in that tell you something about who you are in relation to others and your past and your history, your successes, failures, achievements. These are perspectives on what happened to you, or what you did or failed to do, what other people did to you. One could have other perspectives. You could have the perspective, I'm a successful, wealthy professional, and your ex-wife might have a different story about you, call you an obnoxious jerk. Or you can have a negative story about yourself. On this dimension of form, one could easily have a story. I could tell you a story why I am a very unfortunate human being. You may not believe it, but I could, and it would be very convincing. And I could tell you a story why I'm one of the greatest. There would be stories, and every one of you could have a story about that proves that you are justified in being miserable, or you could have another story that says, oh, you're actually very good. But they're all just stories. So there will be some stories in your mind. But is that who you are? And the stories, of course, refer to other people, your reflection in the lives of others. And so that they don't exist in isolation. And they are reinforced by others, and so on. Who am I? So the question is, are you what your mind tells you about yourself? On the level of form, that's one way of looking at who you are, but there's a deeper dimension. We've just been talking about form identity, and what most humans don't know yet, because it's not taught at school, whereas it should be one of the most important things, not one of the most, the most important thing taught at school. There is in you a deeper dimension, and there's an essence identity that you can sense. Even while you play whatever your role is or your function is in the world of form, and even while you do things and deal with things and speak to people and even think, it is possible to sense in the background of your life your essence identity. And what is that? It's this. Being aware that there's a presence in you, which is not the right way of describing it. Let's put it differently. Being aware that you are a presence. Being aware of the presence that you are, I am. Another way of pointing to it, being aware, quite simply, right now, that you are aware, that you are, I am. And that has no content. There's just a knowing, a sensing of a presence, and that is who or what you are. The one thing that you cannot doubt is that there is a conscious presence here. I am that, before there's any content to it. That is the light of consciousness, and then things appear in the light of consciousness, or illuminated by the light of consciousness, or the light of consciousness becomes those things, thoughts, sense perceptions. But there would be no sense perceptions without the light of consciousness. There would be no thoughts without the light of consciousness. In other words, there would be no world without you. Because you are the light of consciousness in which the world appears. And that's form, the world of form. The center of your attention always bring back into the present, because it's, first of all, because it's all there ever is. Well, that's a good reason. Because it's life itself. Your life situation, yes, it exists in time. There's a past and a future as far as your life situation is concerned, but it's not your life. I wrote about that a long time ago, but it's so important. People confuse their life situation with something more fundamental, more real, more immediate, deeper, which is called life. Life situation is circumstances and events in your life. And most of your life situation is experienced in your mind.
And then life situation is relationships, work situation, financial situation, living situation, all kinds of often problematic situations. It's very rare that all of these situations are working smoothly and perfectly. Relationships, family, professional work, financial, environment, living situation, health situation, all working in harmony and perfectly. It can happen for short periods, but usually something somewhere goes wrong. It has to periodically, frequently. That's normal and that's good. But your life situation always has this element of uncertainty, instability too, although you might not recognize that when you look at seemingly solid things. And your life is your experience of this moment, the only thing there ever is. And if you neglect that, you miss the whole thing. And then you reach a retirement age or old age and you say, was that it? And perhaps you spent your whole life trying to arrive at some point, and the points change that you want to arrive at, but you always want to arrive at some other point. So when your attention is in the present, yes, you're more alert, which is helpful. You notice things that before you didn't notice, people, objects, all kinds of things around you, natural things, and everything is a manifestation of life all around you. And the deeper aspect of being present is not just being aware of your surroundings, although that's fine. You're aware of yourself as the aware presence. And that is the secret, that is the key, that is not something that one can easily explain. You can only experience it, what it means to be aware of yourself, not as an ego self, like having a relationship with this conceptual identity, that's me, I don't like me, or I love me, I'm in love with me. That's happened to Narcissus, and things after that didn't go well for him. Although you hear that quite often in certain people, they like, I love me. Well, it's a little strange. Who are you, and who or what is the me? Oh, I hadn't thought about that. I love myself. I hate myself. Oh, that's worse even. That's not uncommon either. I'm not happy with myself. But who is that I that constantly says these things? Who is that I that has a relationship with ultimately an imagined entity, mind-made, conceptual entity? And this happened to me one night, as I talked about briefly in The Power of Now, when my mind said, I can't live with myself anymore, because I was unhappy, and I couldn't stand the unhappiness anymore. So I can't live with myself anymore. And this sentence suddenly, I looked at it, And I realized it was a very strange statement. I cannot live with myself. At that point I realized that there must be two of me here. I and the self that I cannot live with. That was an incredible realization. There's two of me. There's the unhappy me that I cannot live with. Who am I and who is that unhappy me? This is almost like a koan, like a Zen riddle that you can't, hard to answer or impossible to answer conceptually, but I actually can answer it conceptually. I couldn't at the time. It took years before I realized what all this meant. At that moment, the consciousness that I am, that was trapped in the movement of thought and continuously absorbed by the movement of thought, this movement of thought created the entity, the person, the unhappy person, the entity, the unhappy entity, the mind-made entity. And it was so active that it absorbed all of my consciousness, was always trapped in the movement of self-identified thoughts. So it was trapped in there, and when this strange statement arose in my mind, and I looked at it, and by looking at these statements, a sudden separation happened between the consciousness that was trapped in the movement of thought, suddenly was able to release itself, to extricate itself from the being held in the movement of thought, and stood back, and there was I, as the consciousness, looking at the unhappy thought movement. So it was a separation of consciousness, was withdrawing from the dimension of thinking. And then, very quickly, thinking subsided. It was no longer fueled. Without the consciousness, there can be no thinking, because thinking is not possible without consciousness. But a thought is consciousness that has taken form, whereas the realization of I as consciousness is consciousness that is prior to form or unconditioned. So I became aware of myself as consciousness, as the I, and the thought then began to dissolve. Consciousness had been, without consciousness, it's nothing. Thought is consciousness that has taken form, and it dissolved. And then I was kind of felt like falling into some hole, but it wasn't not fearful. The next morning I woke up, and I was at peace, like a new person, or no person. I was just contemplating things around me, and everything was lovely. And I didn't know why I was at peace. And then I went around the city, on the buses, still at peace, the hustle and bustle of London where I was living. I was at peace. Why I was at peace? I couldn't understand it. This, of course, now the peace that passes all understanding. I suppose that's several years it took me to understand why. That's very weird. I did not realize that I was at peace for one reason, and the reason was that I wasn't thinking that much anymore. Especially there's the whole movement of thought that is imbued with a sense of self-referential thought wasn't happening anymore. Occasional thoughts, yes. But a lot of the time there was just awareness, but I didn't have a word for it, I just called it peace. And so what happened then was the consciousness had withdrawn from its until then it had been imprisoned in the movement of thought and continuously absorbed by thought. And then it stepped out.
Is the ego the source of our thoughts, or are our thoughts generated elsewhere and pass through the ego?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. There is no ego apart from the thoughts. The thoughts, identification with thoughts is ego. But the thoughts that go through your mind, of course, are linked to the collective mind of the culture you live in, humanity as a whole. So they are not your thoughts as such, but you pick them up from the collective, most of them. And so you identify with thinking, and the identification with thinking becomes ego, which means simply that you believe in every thought that arises, and you derive your sense of who you are from what your mind is telling you of who you are. Opinions, viewpoints of that's me. That's some people talk to themselves and say, you are so good. Why doesn't the world recognize you? Or the mind says, you're no good. Same thing. You're no good at all. You fail at everything, don't you? Again, and then you believe in it. And then you suddenly have a low view of yourself. Why you have a low view? Because you believed in your thoughts. And why are you thinking those thoughts? Probably you picked them up somewhere, maybe in childhood. Maybe your mom was so stressed out that you said you're no good. And so you pick up certain thoughts and they get stuck in your head. Thoughts that you hear in childhood, they're little energy forms, like entities, and they get stuck in your head and don't refuse to go. They go. And the more you believe in it, the more more deeply lodged they become in your mind. And so some people are stuck with very hostile entities. I'm saying entity, not in some spooky way, but every thought is an energy form, and as such we could call it an entity. And there are many people in this world who are stuck with hostile, life-denying, continuously critical and attacking entities that they carry in their head, and they believe that is who they are. And they are continuously attacking themselves. And if they are not attacking themselves, they attack others around them. Let me tell you who you are. Of course, what they're really saying is, let me tell you who I am. So they project the famous saying, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. Which means you look at reality through the screen of your thinking and your judgment, which is conditioned by the past. A dreadful prison to live in. It's like blinkers, worse than blinkers. It's like looking at reality through heavy veils. Ooh, looks so dark here. Is that a human being or? So the identification with thinking, believing in your thoughts, having no space outside of the movement of thought. Again, here we come to the vital thing, lack of space inside. That is the unconscious condition, spiritually, completely unconscious. And then you are burdened with a heavy ego. You are the ego. which is not an entity apart from thought. It is thoughts that you have identified with. And the first moment of freedom comes when you realize that certain thoughts have been going through your head for years, perhaps, and that they are only thoughts, and that you are not the thought, you're the awareness. In my case, I became aware that I had a thought, for example, that started in childhood, one of many negative thoughts I had. Bad things always happen to me. Bad things always happen to me. And that was when I saw people around me, okay, they have got all these nice things, and always there would be bad things happening. And of course, your perception then becomes selective. When you have a thought like that, you notice much more, because in everybody's life, things in daily life, things go wrong. You miss a bus. You get stuck in a traffic jam, or you lose some money. But yes, this is normal. But if you have the thought, bad things always happen to me, you're extremely aware of those things, and they confirm to you that the thought is correct. And this is the selective perception of reality through the screen of thinking. So the reality will confirm to you, and not only that, that thought or any thought of that kind actually attracts bad things, negative things. Or if you believe people are basically bad, and that's a deep-seated belief, and you don't realize it's only a thought in your head or a belief, not only would you single out where you observe unethical or bad behavior in others, you would, there it is. Not only that, you actually are much more likely to encounter people who manifest that kind of behavior because you attract it. And so that's just incredible how people create their world through that. So freedom comes from stepping out, encountering, first of all, a little bit of space inside you, presence. And then from there you realize certain thoughts as repetitive and just a thought. Bad things always happen to me. Oh, there it goes again. I thought that before. So that's to become free of ego means becoming free of thought, identification with thought. That's the end of the ego. It may reassert itself from time to time, but at least that's the awakening. What about your thoughts? Habitual thoughts, do you?
Probably that I have to get everything right. There's an intense, figure it out and get it right. It rules me.
And if it's not right?
I escape. I just won't do it. I pretty much predict ahead of time, so I won't try a lot of times.
Yes. Yes. Some people are afraid of not succeeding in whatever they do because they have their self-image, which is derived from thinking, would suffer. If I fail at something, then my self-image will be injured, and therefore I'm not even going to try. And again, that's to do with deriving your identity from thinking. And even the thought, I have failed, is a lie. I am a failure is an even greater lie. You have not failed, you can simply reinterpret and say, I have learned something here. This is not for me, for example. So, but why believe the lies that your mind produces?
So, as you know, many people live with a very hostile mind. But those people their motivation would probably be very great, I would hope, to get out of their minds. But first they need to realize that their problems are self-generated, mind-generated, not world-generated. Thank you.
When you communicate with others, let's say about political situation or whatever it may be, we communicate verbally or in writing, or just have a monologue in your head. People have monologues in their head. This is normal. The important thing to avoid so that ego doesn't come in is again to make other human beings wrong, to make wrong who they are. I'm not talking about what they do, but to make wrong who they are. There is a difference. You can criticize what a person says or does, but if you then use whatever this person says or does and say that is his or her identity, then you've created an enemy in your mind, and that is a dangerous thing to do because it strengthens the unconsciousness in the collective energy field and produces a corresponding reactive effect in the other, and then there's a mutual strengthening of that, and that leads to huge conflict. And you get more and more trapped in your ego and in being right. So if you can take action and communicate, take action without having your sense of self invested in it, so that you point out your perspective, you explain it, you substantiate it, you illustrate it. This is how I see it, this is how the situation is, this is what we need to do or be careful of. All this is fine. You can attack another person's point of view or perspective without attacking who that person is. You can attack because that is and you attack it by presenting, by showing that it is not right and presenting an alternative, so that your communication is not just pointing out what in your view is wrong, but also suggesting an alternative, so that there is the positive and negative both coming in. It's extremely satisfying to the ego to make people wrong and entire groups of people wrong. So you have to be careful with that. But you can only really, the prerequisite for being able to do that is that you need to, and here we come again to the foundation for it all, for conscious living and conscious doing. The foundation is that you derive your sense of identity from that deeper place of consciousness, of presence. You are the awareness. You are not the thought. The thought is fine, but if there is self-seeking in the thought structures, that means you are identified with your thoughts, which being identified with your thoughts means seeking your sense of self in those thoughts. So when you present your opinion or your viewpoint, you are so identified with it that anybody who even questions, not even attack, anybody who questions your viewpoint or perspective is, and this is unconscious, deeply unconscious, ego. Anybody who questions your perspective or viewpoint, which you don't know is a perspective or viewpoint, to you it is the absolute truth, because you're identified with the thought. Anybody who questions it will be regarded as somebody who is attacking who you are. He is actually an enemy, your enemy. And this is the essence of unconsciousness, to be identified completely with your mental positions. Instead of, but how can you not be identified with your mental positions if you have never known that deeper place within yourself where your true identity resides? So I cannot even tell, if you tell somebody don't be identified with your mental positions and your thoughts, your perspectives, your viewpoint, don't mistake them for the absolute truth. They don't know what you're talking about and they can't do, what do you mean? That's all there is. So the foundation for being able to use your mind consciously instead of being used by your mind, which is the essence of unconsciousness, the foundation for that is find out who you are in the essence of your being, and that is here and now, the consciousness that you are, the awareness, the presence. That's what's left when right now you don't remember your history. Right now you don't remember even your name. Unless I ask you, you're not thinking your name. No, okay. So you can be yourself without remembering your name. And if I don't ask you about your history, right at this moment, you probably don't remember any of your personal history. Unless you go there, you have to retrieve it in your mind. But you don't need it now. Now, does it mean you cannot be yourself now? Does it mean if you don't remember your telephone number and your email address and your personal history, you can't be yourself? No. These are just things that are added on to you. But even without remembering any of these things, I don't remember my email address, I don't remember my name, I don't remember my history even. And here I am sitting and perceiving, and I can you feel yourself? Can you feel the essence of you right now without the memory of you? Yes, in fact you can feel it more strongly, but you cannot define what exactly that is. You can sense this inherent presence that you are. And you can sense it, and that inherent presence is the same whether you are a huge success story in the eyes of the world, you are a VIP and a celebrity, there may be one or two here, not that it makes much difference here, or you may be somebody who has failed in everything that he or she has done, a failed career, 3 failed marriages, many other failed relationships, bankruptcy, gone to prison, then come out of prison, then gone back into prison, made a mess of the whole thing, total failure, and yet in the moment of not remembering your history, that sense of presence is exactly the same as that sense of presence of the VIP who has a big success story. That is the unconditioned consciousness, the presence that frees you from your personality in your person. And that is, and also connects you to a much vaster intelligence, the intelligence that underlies the entire creation, that is behind everything, the organizing principle behind the physical universe, the intelligence that gradually expresses itself more and more into this world. The light, I call it the light of the source, like the sun shines its light into this world. The sun is the source of the light. Now the source of the world, we could call, if God means anything, then God is the source of all life. And of course, the source of all life has no location in space or time. Obviously, it's not somewhere in the universe God lives. God is transcendent to the universe. It is the source. God is the source of all life in the same way that the sun is the source of all light. And so the relationship between your consciousness, which is not your consciousness, it is universal consciousness expressing itself through you, the relationship between that consciousness that you are and the source is the same as the sun and the sunlight.
The mind stopped. A lovely spiritual practice I recommend is, well, you may remember we talked about sitting quietly in a room. That in itself can be a spiritual practice, like now. You sit in a room or anywhere else and look around. Taking in individual things, but also the totality of the space. And the practice is to perceive without any thought. Just be aware. There's no need to interpret or label. So you're aware simultaneously of the totality of the room, and then occasionally little things. There's a fan, but you don't label it, I'm just saying it now. And that's not all, though. What you're perceiving is it's not just visual. There may also be auditory perception. There might be certain noises coming from somewhere. And you may also become aware not only of the content of the room, what's in it, and what constitutes the room, which is the
the limits, the boundaries of the room, the floor, the ceiling, the walls. But you're also aware of something that you cannot actually see or perceive with any of the senses, and yet it's out there. What is it? What is the most important thing about this room? The space. Now, is space something? Well, not really. It just enables everything to be, but it's not a thing. And yet there's the space of this room is the essence of this room. But you can't actually say, where's the space? I can't see it, but I think it's here. In the Tao Te Ching, there's a line, I think it's about a bowl. There's the bowl, and what makes it useful is the space. That's the essence. And that outer space corresponds to something we could call inner space. There's also something in you that is the inner space of aware presence. And again, you can't say there it is, because it's that which makes all sense perceptions possible is the consciousness. So as you sit in the room, you're aware of not only the content of the room, you're also aware of one could almost say the presence of the room. Simultaneously, you're aware of the presence of yourself, which again you cannot see, and you can't perceive it with the senses because it's the very foundation for all perception. So it's the presence. And then somehow the outer space and inner space become a single thing, or rather a single no thing. And that means you are aware of this space that is within and without, the presence. The presence. Do you want to attach other words to it? The transcendent presence, the light of the world, the light of consciousness, divine presence. And if you're not resistant to theistic terms, you could go so far as to say the presence of God, the emanation of God into this world. And when you become so acutely conscious, within and without, then you do notice something that we could call a sacred presence that's always there when you become fully conscious of presence. But fully conscious of presence is when I speak about it, it sounds like two things: conscious of presence. That's because I'm formulating words, a sentence structure, subject and object. But it's not there's no duality there. It's becoming self-aware. Awareness becomes self-aware. So you become aware of a presence that is both within and without, that is essentially who you are and infinitely transcends who you are as this entity, but is essentially who you are. and connects you with the totality of all life, and connects you with the source of all life, in fact, emanates from the source of all life. You are an emanation from the source of all life. And that is your ultimate and your essence reality, and that emanation is, if we want to use a term, consciousness, the light of consciousness, and it's not subject to what everything else is subject to, and that is time. So that is the timeless dimension, because everything else is subject to time, this thing that is at work within every life form, the thing that enables everything to grow, and yet is also that which destroys it eventually. Time builds you up, and then it tears you down. You grew up in time, reached maturity, maybe some kind of success, finally paid off the mortgage, and then, okay, I made it now, and that's the beginning of the downward journey. And that's often regarded as bad, and the stage of growth is regarded as good, but the two are interdependent. One cannot be without the other. So we're all being consumed by time, devoured by the fire of time. And that applies to all life forms. Buddha, one of the central teachings of Buddha is the impermanence of all forms.
Hi, Eckhart. My question is, when I try to maintain presence in my everyday life, I'm aware that my subconscious need for superiority sabotages me pretty regularly, and it happens very often. So I wonder what suggestions you have.
It would be nice for us to have one or two examples of how that looks.
I was afraid you would ask that. Typically when, like this morning, someone approached me and they were anxious and worried and off balance, and I thought, it's sort of an automatic thing, sort of, why don't you get your act together? And rather than just having a positive exchange. And then I notice, of course, when I'm anxious or off balance, I want everybody to be kind and understanding. So it's, I judge that as not a good thing. I would like to be more automatically kind.
Okay. One more example, perhaps?
One more? Okay, when my question was chosen and I was invited to be here, I was really excited about that, and it was tempting to think, and it was kind of my first thought that, oh, isn't this wonderful? I have this great question, but I quickly realized that in reality, that's it might be a pertinent question, but it's not about me, and it doesn't mean that I'm great. Okay.
Yeah.
So it seems like a constant fight for me.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's very normal, that kind of mind activity. It's just
as awareness arises, it seems to be more of a problem than it would be for a normally unconscious person. Now, the good thing is that the awareness is there of it. If you were totally unconscious, that is identified with those thought patterns, you wouldn't even know it, because the essence of identification is you don't know it. You are it. You are the thought. So you would then, instead of feeling superior and realizing that you feel superior and then not wanting to feel superior, you would just feel superior. And that would be really unconscious. And that would be quite normal. Now, because awareness arises, that's a good thing. You're aware of certain mind patterns, subtle things where you feel superior or special. It's another word for it, that's specialness. Because specialness doesn't, superior always implies better than. Specialness could also be, I'm much worse off than you, that's why I'm so special. My problems are much bigger than yours. Don't tell me about your problems. Let me tell you about mine. Or as my dad used to say, when people said, I have a headache, or whatever ache, that you have a headache? I've had a headache for weeks. That's not so much superiority, but, well, in a way it is. It's specialness. I'm more special than you because I have more headaches than you. I must be more interesting or whatever the reasoning behind it is. It's irrational, of course. So awareness is there, which is a decisive factor. It has come in. The awareness is aware of that mind pattern. Then, however, the awareness is obscured again by an additional mind pattern that says, I shouldn't be having these thoughts, which are more thoughts. So we have three things here in operation. There's the original thought pattern, harmless as it may be, but there's a recognition of the thought pattern, which comes from the fact that there's awareness. Through awareness, the thought pattern is recognized. But then the mind comes in again. It uses the awareness, the recognition that arose through awareness, to construct an additional level of problems which says, I shouldn't be having those thoughts. I'm not a good person anymore if I have those thoughts. I'm not kind if I have those thoughts. And what is that? Thoughts. So it can happen that as awareness arises, which is a wonderful thing, you're not totally identified with the mind pattern anymore. And then the mind is so cunning that out of that recognition, it creates new mind patterns. And the new mind patterns say, I'm not a kind person if I think that. I mustn't think, I feel bad about thinking that, I shouldn't. By now I should be rid of that, whatever it says. So that's where you have to be careful to become aware that the mind has come in again after the awareness. That is not necessary, but you didn't know that. That was unconscious. So the mind has it's very cunning. You recognize the mind there, and then the mind comes back in again and uses your recognition to manufacture more thought out of that.
Right.
And this is why it's very good to ask that question. It helps everybody, so you are special.
Thank you.
But of course, everybody has similar problems, so we are all special. That's where once you're aware of that, you can then recognize that as unnecessary. You don't need that. It's superfluous mind activity that does nothing except strengthen your mind. So, and then you can simply allow the recognition to be there without the additional mental judgment of, let's say, something wrong with you. And that in itself gradually dissolves the power of the mind pattern. All you need is the awareness of what your mind is doing. Then gradually, what your mind is doing becomes less dense, less powerful, and the awareness grows. So there's a shrinking of the mind pattern and a growing of the awareness. The only way the mind can stop that pattern is by, as I said, by coming in after the awareness and creating more thought around that. So just be happy with being aware. It's a mind pattern, it's nothing to do with who you are. You're not an unkind person, you're not whatever the mind says. It's just there's that mind pattern. Isn't that interesting? There it is. And that is in itself sufficient.
Great. Thank you so much.